right, cool. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the pin tool to cut the subject out, and I'm going to be try to be a little bit precise, but I'm going to do it too precise because I don't want to waste too much time on this. All right, cool. So I'm going to Control J to duplicate that layer. Now we have one for backup. I'm going to go ahead and Control or Command G to group that and right click and put that to violet. I always just put the subject in violet. It's just what I always do. But yeah, now I'm going to do some touch up on the cutouts. First, I'm going to go down here and add a solid color adjustment layer, and for this I'm just going to make it a little bit darker because I really can't see what's going on. So I will go to this top one, right click and go convert to smart object. Now we have that layer without the mask. All right, so I'm going to put a new mask on there and to kind of just mask out some of these things that I don't want. All right, I'm actually just going to right click and convert to smart object again. Now I'm going to go behind the subject, add a new layer, and I'm going to get a brush, a soft round brush, and I'm going to go up here and reduce the size by quite a bit, probably like 7 pixels. All right, I'm going to go to the flow and go about 15%, kind of do a test. Trying to paint hair, so I'm going to do these colors here. All right, that's too much. I'm going to go down to 4%, and that seems about right. All right, so the pixel size is about 5, maybe 4. All right, I'm going to actually just go down to 2, and I think that we have kind of a good size going on here. So you just kind of have to play around with it and possibly look at the initial image to kind of get a feel of how big and how strong you want that hair to be. There's different opacities to each strand, so I'm just kind of looking back at the image and trying to replicate that a little bit. All right, so now that I'm done with drawing the hair, I'm going to go ahead and shift click everything. I'm going to press Control or Command Alt or Option plus E to compile that into a new layer. So I have all of the hair in one layer. All right, I'm going to go ahead and select all the hair from before and just press Control or Command G, group that, and I'm going to hide that group. All right, I'm going to put this into red because I'm not going to use that anymore. All right, so now that we have the hair, we're just going to shift click the subject and the hair and press Control or Command Alt or Option plus E to compile the subject and the hair together. All right, so I'm going to Control or Command G on the subject and the hair and put that into red as well because I'm not going to use that anymore. Part 1. All right, so now we have the subject and the hair all in one layer. So the first thing I kind of want to do is try to make her, because it looks like her makeup kind of faded away throughout her day. So I'm just going to kind of make this a little bit more prominent. All right, so the shapes are really sharp. So I'm just going to go along the line that she had initially in the first place. And I'm just going to continue to do that. I'm going to actually go to paths and double click paths and I'm just going to type face. And this way we can always have that selection if we need it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a hue and saturation adjustment layer in there. I'm going to automatically make the selection on the mask. All right, so I'm gonna just colorize this actually, and make it into a red and just kind of see what looks best. So that made it pop out a lot more. All right, so I chose this background, just a 3D rendered background. I'm going to go ahead and go filter, blur gallery, build blur, and I will do that by 30 pixels. So that way it gives depth of field and it will look better with other things that I will use with depth of field. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and try to color grade the subject to match the scene a little bit better. All right, so first of all, I'm just gonna use a color balance adjustment layer. All right, I'm gonna clip it down to the subject by just pressing this box here and kind of give her a purple hue. So blue and magenta, maybe a little bit of red. So this is the hue that I want, but it's a little bit too much. So I'm gonna reduce the opacity till I have a little bit of a happy medium. All right, so this is a little bit better. So with that, I'm going to kind of match the lighting as well. So what I'll do is add a curves adjustment layer and clip that all the way down to the subject. I'll go down till I feel like it matches a bit better. I'll put a threshold adjustment layer on top, on the very top. And I'll just go down until I see black in the background. All right. So here's the darkest areas on the background. So I'm gonna match the subject with that. So I wanna look at the skin tones here on the face, and that's what I'm gonna match with this darkness here. All right, so technically, as you can see, the subject matches the background now for the most part. So technically this is the darkness that the subject would be in the scene, but there are all kinds of different lights going on as well. And I don't want my subject to be that dark. So I'm gonna leave this as a point of reference, and I'm gonna go Alt or Option and copy it. All right, I'll clip that one too. I'll undo this one and kind of work with the mask on this to brighten up the subject. All right, so I'm gonna make sure I have a soft round brush, and the flow I'm gonna go down to about like 10%. Just kind of paint where I want more light to be. So like the focal points of the subject definitely want more light. And I'll just continue to use black and white to paint in and paint out some lighting on the subject. So that's better. I'm actually going to reduce the opacity because I feel like that it's too much, even though technically it matches the scene. I'm just going to kind of go off my eye. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete this first curves layer. Now we have more depth in the image. I have to make sure to paint color on the subject as well. All right, so this is important. So with any scene, you want to paint from the sky onto the subject. That way it will make the subject look a lot more realistic, like she's actually in the scene. So I'm just gonna do this, paint some color on there. I'm actually gonna go heavy with the paint and then reduce it in a second. All right, so I'm gonna make sure this is actually clipped to the subject. That way, it's not bleeding everywhere else. So this is actually really heavy paint, and I'm just gonna lighten it up by reducing the opacity. So I'm just gonna slowly go in until it looks better. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and use a soft brush to erase maybe some on the face because it is a little much, and the face is the focal point. So I'm just going to get rid of that real quick. All right, so I'm just going to take this image that I found online and I'm going to do a selection on just the red parts. All right, so I'm just going to go to select color range and I'll do this color and just kind of make sure I get all of the flower that I want. I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And now I have a selection of just the red area. So now I'll press Controller Command C and Controller Command V to copy and paste that selection. All right, cool. So now I have these cool petals that I can work with. All right, so right away I'm just gonna erase the areas that I don't want and press Control or Command J to duplicate that. All right, so now I'm just gonna kind of play around with just this. So I'm gonna press L for the lasso tool and select something, press Alt or Option, just kind of drag things around until I feel like it looks pretty good. All right, you can also scale these with Controller Command T, rotate them. This is all being worked on one layer. All right, so I'm just gonna try to make it look good. All right, so this is looking pretty all right. Okay, so I'm gonna right click and convert to smart object. I'll go to filter, blur, and motion blur. Okay, so I want it kind of doing this direction, and as you can see, it kind of gives it that motion blur, and I like that, so I'm gonna do that. I'm actually gonna uncheck that real quick and duplicate the layer by pressing Controller Command J. So on the bottom layer, I'm going to get rid of this filter. So I'm going to go trash. All right, cool. So I'm going to turn that back on and I'm going to kind of continue to play around with this. So I want some in the background and I want some in the foreground. So some are going to be super big, but I don't want it to like cover any areas on the subject. So I'll right click and rasterize the layer to get rid of the smart objects so I can continue to move these petals around. And I'm just going to kind of scale these a bit and kind of move them around. So now that these are in the foreground, we have depth of field. I'm going to go ahead and right click, convert to smart objects, and go to filter, blur, gallery field blur. And these are going to actually be really high, 85 pixels. Okay, so I want to do one more. So I'm just going to Alt Option and drag that to the top to duplicate that. And I'm going to put a Hue and Saturation Adjustment layer on it. Clip that to the new one and colorize. I'm going to bring this below the subject, actually. Kind of mess around and see what looks good. I want it to be like a little bit of a different hue. All right, so now I can delete these two that I'm not going to use and continue with the composition. One thing I want to do really quickly is I'm going to use a Hue and Saturation Adjustment layer on the subject. So it's already clipped all the way down because I put it in between a clipped layer. And I'm going to colorize. I'm going to colorize the subject and increase the saturation and press Controller Command I to invert the mask. So with the black, you can't see anything. I will reveal this with white. All right, so I'm just gonna do this really like not very well just to see the color. All right, so I want to match her lips with the roses, maybe not too much. All right, so I'm just gonna go back in here and kind of touch this up a little bit. I think I'm gonna put a curves adjustment layer on the background. So I'll just clip that curves adjustment layer to the background, kind of give them a little bit more contrast, and it just kind of reduce the lightness of it all. I just really want like a lot of contrast and deep colors, and I'm going to add contrast to the subject as well. All right, so I'm going to add another curves and kind of just give her a bit more contrast as well. All right, so I'm going to group the flowers and I'm going to put a curves adjustment layer and clip it to that group. And just give those a little bit of more contrast as well too. Just kind of make it super consistent. All right, so I know I got one more petal layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and be as consistent as possible and give more contrast. All right, so I'm going to do a trick on her face to kind of make a lot of depth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to gradient map. All right, so I'm going to have this black and white gradient. I'm going to add points. Okay, so this color hue is going to be 0, saturation 0, and brightness is going to be 50%. Okay, so I'm going to press OK on that one. This needs to be in the center. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing here, except this is going to be 0 and this is going to be 25%. Okay. And then this one here, same thing, 0, and this is going to be 75. Now that we have this gradient, press OK. I'm going to clip this to the subject. Okay. And I'm going to put this into luminosity blending mode. All right. So now when I change the values, it will affect the luminance in the subject. All right. So I'm just going to try to make some depth using this. So the more I go up on here, the darker the blacks will get. All right, so the midtones I want a little bit darker, and the highlights I want to pop out a little bit more. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and go overboard and then reduce the effect with opacity. All right, so first of all, I'm gonna go Control or Command I to invert the mask on the layer. Then I'm just gonna paint this only on the face. All right, so with a white brush at 100%, I'll just paint that effect only on her face. All right, so here's the difference on just that. So it's a pretty big difference. All right, so I'm gonna go back and look at it. It's too much, so I'm just gonna reduce and build up until I feel like it's in a good spot. I'm gonna copy this by pressing Alt or Option and dragging up. I'm gonna clip it all the way down to the subject, and on the mask, I'm gonna press Control or Command and backspace to fill everything with black. All right, so now, actually, I'm gonna go Control or Command I to make it all white. I'm gonna go back in here, and this time I'm gonna look at like the rest of her body and her hair as well when I'm doing this. So I want to make sure to get everything to pop really well. So on the mask, I'll press Control or Command I to invert and just kind of paint in areas that I want to pop a little bit more. All right, so we definitely got some out of that. Just gonna try to enhance her eyes a bit. I'll go ahead and use the curves adjustment layer and just increase that all the way. Blow it out and press Control or Command I to invert that and just kind of see what I can do with this. All right, so I will erase the areas that are not the eye, and I'm gonna erase in the black area as well. Really want to make sure that's not anywhere other than the eye. All right, so I'm gonna Control or Command and select just the areas I painted, and below that curves adjustment layer, I'm going to make a solid color adjustment layer, and I'll make that orange. I'll make another layer, just a blank layer. Shift click these two, press Control or Command G to group that. All right, now I can put a mask on that group and work non-destructively. All right, so I'm just gonna erase some of the top here. Get this out of here. This way we kind of got a better look to this. All right, so on top of the subject, I'm gonna add another curves adjustment layer. Just kind of put this up a little bit. Make sure that's clipped to the subject only, and the Control or Command I on the mask. Then I'm just gonna paint in where I want it to be that bright. So I'm gonna go Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E to compile that into a brand new layer on top. I'll convert that to a smart object and filter camera raw. First, I'm going to go to curve and give it a matte because later on I like to do further color grading and just kind of give it this curve here. All right, so on basic, I'm going to go up in the exposure and just going to give it a little bit of a purple tint. I'm going to actually go down on the whites and the highlights. I'll go up in the shadows a bit and down on the blacks. But I'll give it a bit of extra boost in the vibrance. I'll go back on the slider up here. I'll go to calibration, give it kind of a teal and orange look to it. Go to the effects and vignette it. All right, so that's all I'm gonna do on the camera raw. Now I'm just gonna go in and do a few more adjustments. All right, so I'm just gonna go with a soft light blending mode layer, and on my brush, I'm just gonna go with 10% flow, and I'm just gonna get a dark red color, just kind of paint a bit of extra color into the subject. I'm gonna go to selective color. I'm gonna go to neutrals, and the opposite of yellow is blue, so I'm gonna add some blue to here. I'm gonna add a vibrance and increase the vibrance. All right, so I'm gonna add a exposure adjustment layer, raise the exposure, and I'll double click and use blend if on the bottom here to take that out of the highlights. So I just wanted to affect the shadows so it's not as dark, and I'll just reduce that. So I think it looks good. All right, so on top of this, I'm gonna use a color balance adjustment layer. I'll go to the shadows and just slightly put in a little bit of blue in the shadows. Double click that, and I will take that out of the highlights. I don't want that in the highlights at all. I'm going to do the same thing, color balance adjustment layer, but this time I'll go into highlights and just give it a bit of extra boost in the highlights. Double click that, and I want that out of the shadows altogether. All right, so I'm just gonna make a final solid color adjustment layer. I'm gonna use pink and put that into soft light blending mode. I'm gonna reduce this to 20% and just kind of change the color a little bit. All right, I will reduce this to about 10%. All right, so with all of the adjustments that I've made, I think that I made her legs too dark and saturated. So what I'm gonna do is add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to reduce the opacity, or I'm going to reduce the saturation and press Control Command I and just paint that on her legs. Now everything's a bit more consistent. So I'm going to press Control Command Alt Option plus Shift plus E to compile everything that we've done into a new layer. Right click, convert to Smart Object, and then press Control Command J to copy that one time. All right, so I'm going to go to this bottom one, go to Filter, Other, High Pass. All right, so for this one, I'm going to look at her eyes. I'll go to 2 pixels, press OK on that, and then put this into Overlay Blending Mode, and then go to the next one. I'm going to go Filter, Other, High Pass, and this time I'm going to go to like 50, and this time I'm looking at her hair mostly. So maybe like 64 is fine. All right, so for this one, I'm going to go into a soft light blending mode. I'm going to reduce this by quite a bit, probably down to like 20%, or yeah, I'll go 20%. All right, I'm going to check this one on and put a black mask on it by pressing Alt Option and the mask button. And now I'm going to paint this with white on the mask, just on her eyes and her face with a 100% flow. All right, so that sharpened the image, and I'm actually going to put this into our light blending mode to make it stronger. And then I'm going to copy the mask by pressing Alt Option and dragging it up. And then I'm going to invert that. So press Control Command I to invert that. So now this one is on everything but the face, and this one is on the face only. All right, so for the last step, I'm going to press Alter Option and the new Layer tab. Then I'm going to go into Soft Light Blending mode and then fill with 50% gray. Right click the layer, convert to Smart Object, filter, noise, add noise. All right, so for every image is a little bit different. In this one, I think that 25 is probably okay. So that way it's very consistent across the whole image, and now all these pictures have the same consistency to it.